Hello, I'm Mariam Mashiri, and this is the Iran War Today, our daily briefing bringing you up to date with all you need to know on the US-Israel war with Iran. Well, let's start with some of today's key developments now. Donald Trump says the US is taking over the Strait of Hormuz as tensions escalate between Washington and Tehran after a week of strikes. Iran warns it will not allow the US to interfere in management of the strait as it targets US bases across the Gulf. All of this is affecting that vital waterway where shipping appears to have almost slowed to a standstill. While the renewed attacks push oil prices back up, with the cost of petrol and diesel rising once again. Well, Donald Trump says the US is now reinstating its blockade of Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz, starting immediately. In a Truth Social post, he says the US will be the guardian of the vital waterway and there'll be a 20% charge on all cargo shipped through. But he doesn't explain how this would work. It comes after a week of escalating strikes between the US and Iran, putting their ceasefire under intense pressure. Well, speaking to Fox and Friends this morning, President Trump said, "We're taking over the strait." Have a listen.
We hit them very hard last night. Every time they send a drone, we hit them very hard. But we had a deal. What nobody knows, we had a deal. It was a done deal. And then they broke it. They always break it. We've had 10 deals with these people. And so we're just going to hit them very hard. And we're going to keep the strait, and we'll probably run it. We'll become the guardian of the strait. Maybe we'll call it the guardian angel of the strait. And we should be reimbursed for that.
Well, joining me now is our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman, who's in Washington, and Baron Abbasi from the BBC's Persian service. Tom, to you first. President Trump says the US is going to guard the strait. How?
Well, I mean, he obviously hasn't set out how they will do that, and every attempt that the US has made previously to control the Strait of Hormuz, or at least to create a system where you can get back to transit the kind of pre-war levels of commercial ships going through there, has failed by the United States. There have been several different mechanisms which they tried to do this, but they simply haven't been able to reopen the strait. What we've seen most recently is attempts by the US to help navigate ships, not by escorting them, but largely by communicating with them close to the coast of Oman, so as far away from the Iranian side in the strait that you can get. And in those cases, when the US has tried to do that, we've seen the Iranians have attacked ships, which has been part of the general reason that we're seeing this escalation at the moment. So Mr. Trump's saying they're going to control the strait and charge a 20% fee, he says, presumably on the value of cargo on these ships. It just seems totally implausible. The other thing that Mr. Trump has said is about reimposing the US naval blockade. That is very significant. Naval blockades are, under international law, an act of war. So this is another rung on the ladder of escalation that is being announced by Mr. Trump today. CENTCOM, the US Central Command, say they expect to start reimposing the naval blockade later today. Now, that is going to be a huge provocation as far as the Iranians are concerned. Getting rid of the naval blockade was one of their key ambitions that helped lead to this de-escalation in the form of that memorandum of understanding around a month ago or so. So that is going to really escalate the situation. It cuts at the heart of what the Iranian government wants and needs, which is money, reconstruction, access, the ability to sell its oil. And this is going to make that again harder for them. So I think we're seeing a real deterioration in the situation at the moment, at least in terms of what Mr. Trump is threatening. Whether all of that comes to pass on the ground or on the water as it is there, of course, I think we'll have to wait and see.
And Baron, how has Iran responded to that statement from Donald Trump?
Response has been swift and defiant. Both political and military officials have reacted to comments by Donald Trump that the U.S. will be the guardian of the Strait of Hormuz. A parliamentary spokesperson has tried to make fun of Donald Trump, saying that Iran is not looking for foreign workers to protect the Strait of Hormuz. And if Donald Trump is looking for a job as a security guard, he should look elsewhere. But the military has gone even further, saying that under no circumstances will it allow the U.S. to interfere in the management of the Strait of Hormuz, as it put it. It accuses the U.S. of disrupting the flow of oil through the waterway, saying that it is the U.S., not Iran, that is disrupting shipping through the Strait of Hormuz through its military intervention. And for Iran, the Strait of Hormuz is not just a bargaining tool, it's not a negotiating tool, it's a matter of strategic importance, it's a matter of national security and sovereignty. And bear in mind that the strait was open before the war, but following the war, since then, Iran has realized that it is one of its last remaining sources of strategic leverage against the United States, and to give that up would be politically and militarily unacceptable for Iran. It believes that the war has proved to the world that the geography is on the side of the Islamic Republic, and the global markets understand that as well. But at the same time, it does not want to return to an all-out war with the United States. The foreign ministry spokesperson has said that it remains in contact with regional mediators, suggesting that it wants to keep negotiating. It doesn't want to return to war with the US, but it doesn't want to give that leverage up either.
Baron and Tom, thank you very much, both of you. Well, this all comes as the US and Iran continue to exchange strikes. So, how have countries across the region reacted to this latest escalation? Barbara Plett-Usher reports now from Jerusalem.
Every time there's another wave of US strikes, it's the regional countries who pay the price. Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, all of them said that they intercepted incoming fire. And the Iranians said they were targeting US military facilities in these countries. They also said that they hit radar systems in Oman. Iran has been actually expanding the geographic reach of its retaliation. For many weeks, it had been focusing on Kuwait and Bahrain, but in the past week, it has fired at Jordan 3 times, and during the war, almost not at all. It's also fired at Oman 2 times, and that's very rare as well, because Oman has presented itself as the regional neutral mediator. Iran has also increased its threats against the Gulf. The Joint Military Command said today, on Monday, that any sort of cooperation with the US would be seen as an act of war. So, of course, the Gulf countries, the Arab countries, are frustrated and alarmed by this, because every time things escalate, that raises the specter of a return to all-out war from which their economies are still struggling to recover. And it also upends efforts to try to open the Strait of Hormuz, which is, of course, crucial for getting their oil and gas out and exporting their oil and gas. As for Israel, the view here is that the Iranians are not going to attack Israel because that would intensify the war, and the Israelis don't think the Iranians want to do that. However, in the Israeli media, there have been comments that we do hope Iran makes that mistake, because we want to be drawn back into the war. We want to finish, as they call it, the mission that they started, and that has been stopped by the US and Iran agreement.
Well, the renewed exchange of attacks has brought shipping in the Strait of Hormuz waterway to a virtual standstill, and it's driven oil prices up again. A reminder, the strait is a key route for global oil transport. So, just how many ships have got through in the last 24 hours? Thomas Copeland from BBC Verify explains.
President Trump says the US naval blockade of Iranian ports is back, and the US will become the guardian of the Strait of Hormuz. So, how did we get here? Well, after a surge of strikes and counterstrikes between US and Iran this weekend, this was the message from Iran on Saturday. The strait will be closed until further notice, they said. No vessels allowed to pass. And then here's a sense of what the strait looked like after that on Sunday, taken from the ship tracking platform Marine Traffic. Now, using this data, plus analysis from maritime intelligence firm Kepler about ships which may have switched off their location trackers, we've identified just 8 fuel tankers or cargo ships that passed through the strait on Sunday. That's down from 34 last week. Then we heard from Iran's Persian Gulf Strait Authority. This is what they had to say. Passage through the strait is currently not possible. And here's what we can see so far moving on marine traffic today. Just 3 vessels appear to have crossed the strait, 2 heading out and 1 heading in. And the routes these vessels are taking, that's also really key. Nearly all of them appear to be travelling along this northern Iranian route rather than this southern route through Omani waters. That's the route recommended by the US. Now, in all of this, the US is insisting that the strait is open. Traffic is flowing, the US military posted yesterday. US forces are prepared to keep it that way, they added. And here's Donald Trump today. He says the Strait of Hormuz is open and that the US will stop Iran's ships or customers from entering or leaving. Now, away from all of this war of words, what's certain is that the numbers we're tracking here, 8 ships per day, 3 ships per day, is a fraction of the 138 or so vessels that used to sail through this critical waterway every single day.
So, where does all this leave the fragile ceasefire and what does it mean for talks going forward? Well, those are some of the most searched questions today. To help answer them, here's our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
So what's happening in the Gulf right now, and specifically in the Strait of Hormuz, is a very depressing return to the deeply unsatisfactory status quo where we were a few weeks ago, before this so-called memorandum of understanding between the USA and Iran. And we're caught in a kind of loop, an escalatory cycle here, where one country is carrying out an attack in one form, whether it's on ships or on land, and there's retaliation by the other country, and so on. Both sides, Iran and the US, want to get back to deal making. It's not in their interest to have a state of war between them, but neither side is prepared to back down. The US is not prepared to allow Iran to have sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz and dictate which route ships must take and exact some toll on those ships passing through their territorial waters. And Iran is not prepared to accept a return to the status quo where it was back in February before the war began. It wants to flex its muscles now because it's worked out that it can weaponize geography and exert control to some extent by threatening shipping. So it's a really uncomfortable situation. And meanwhile, the Gulf states, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, etc., they are really suffering from this now because they were just getting back to business as normal, starting to plan conferences and symposiums in their countries in the autumn, when the heat of summer subsides. Those are now all in jeopardy because you can't stage a conference in a country if a big venue like a conference hall is going to get droned from just across the water in Iran. So there's going to be mounting pressure on Donald Trump to resolve this. The Iranians know this. That's why I think they're going to hang tough.
Now, whether you are joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thank you for your time. That's all from the Iran War Today.